Okay folks, buckle up. Today on the Mysteria Archive, we're exploring the true story of Operation Chaos, a once-secret Cold War-era CIA program that collected intelligence on Americans from 1967 to 1974. Now revealed through declassified records, get ready for a wild ride. What if the biggest threat to the 1960s counterculture wasn't drugs, protests, or rebellion, but surveillance? Not from the public, not from the press, but from the shadows of its own government. While young Americans marched, sang, and resisted, a hidden program was quietly listening. It was called Operation Chaos, a covert CIA mission designed to track dissent, map out movements, and perhaps influence outcomes. This isn't just a story about spying. It's about how far fear can stretch the mandate of power, and how even in a free society, the lines between protection and control can quietly blur, leaving a permanent mark on the American psyche. This is a historical overview based on declassified documents and journalistic reports. Our full source links and citations are in the description below. So, imagine the 1960s. Not just Woodstock and peace signs, but also dudes in suits scribbling notes on who you're hanging out with at a protest. And that's the twist. Operation Chaos sounds like a Bond villain plan, but it was real. And the name? Either someone had a flair for drama or zero sense of irony. Now, we're not talking tinfoil hats or lizard overlords here. This was the CIA, a government agency tasked with looking outward, somehow turning its lens inward on its own people. So yeah, if you've ever thought your anti-war bumper sticker might get you on a list, you're not totally wrong. Now let's rewind the tape and find out how we got here. Spoiler alert, it starts with a lot of fear and even more paperwork. Setting the stage, why the 60s were so tense. By the early 1960s, America wasn't just living through history, it was colliding with it. Overseas, the Cold War was a constant chess match with nuclear consequences. At home, the Vietnam War was escalating. Civil rights protests were gaining momentum, and the younger generation was refusing to sit down and shut up. The government saw this explosion of activism not just as cultural rebellion, but as a potential threat. And what if these protests weren't homegrown? What if foreign actors, Soviets, Cubans, whoever, were pulling strings from behind the scenes? That question planted a seed of paranoia that would bloom into surveillance programs like Operation Chaos. But it wasn't the first time the US agencies had blurred the lines between external and internal threats. Post-World War II, institutions like the CIA and the FBI grew rapidly. They were built to protect against enemies abroad, but increasingly they turned that machinery inward. The FBI's COINTELPRO had already begun infiltrating civil rights groups. The CIA, by law, wasn't supposed to operate domestically, but in practice, that line got awfully fuzzy. And when students flooded campuses, chanting against the war and the establishment, the question wasn't just what they were saying, but who might be listening. Were they being radicalized, funded, trained by outsiders? These weren't abstract questions in DC, they were driving intelligence priorities. By the mid-1960s, a national security state had emerged, vast, well-funded, and increasingly uncertain about where the real threat was coming from. And when power doesn't know where to aim, it tends to look everywhere. You know, things are getting spicy when the phrase foreign agitator starts getting thrown around every time someone picks up a protest sign. It's like, hey, I just don't want to be drafted, doesn't mean I'm on Khrushchev's payroll. Now this section really sets the tone. Massive distrust, rising tension, and a government that's trying to play national security whack-a-mole. Except the mole is students and civil rights leaders. What's wild is how fast we're protecting democracy turns into we're watching everyone who disagrees. It's like giving your overprotective uncle access to national surveillance tech and saying use this wisely. Spoiler, he doesn't. Anyway, let's head into the belly of the beast and see what Operation Chaos actually looked like, because it only gets weirder from here. What was Operation Chaos? On paper, the CIA had one job: collect foreign intelligence. Domestic operations? That was somebody else's department. But in 1967, that line started to blur. Enter Operation Chaos. Officially launched under President Lyndon B. Johnson and later expanded during Nixon's term, Operation Chaos was the CIA's internal response to growing fears that foreign powers were influencing America's burgeoning protest culture. The Vietnam War was raging, and demonstrations against it were erupting nationwide. What if Moscow or Havana were whispering in the ears of student leaders? That concern was enough to justify turning the CIA's gaze inward. And between 1967 and 1974, the program grew from a cautious surveillance operation into a vast database of domestic intelligence. At its peak, Operation Chaos reportedly tracked over 300,000 names, compiling thousands of files on anti-war activists, civil rights organizers, and more. Its stated goal? To uncover evidence of foreign influence with American descent. But here's the catch. It never really found any. Despite years of spying and intel gathering, no significant links to foreign manipulation emerged. Still, the program marched on. CIA operatives, typically focused on espionage abroad, found themselves monitoring protest rallies on college campuses or infiltrating peace groups in American cities. And while Operation Chaos operated in the shadows, its scale and persistence revealed something deeper, a shift in priorities. By targeting citizens for their beliefs, not their crimes, the program raised a quiet but fundamental question. When the line between foreign and domestic blurs, who holds the pen that redraws it? Okay, so let's get this straight. The CIA, the people who run spy rings, topple governments, and wear sunglasses indoors, suddenly turned their attention to college kids with picket signs. That's like deploying Navy SEALs to break up a book club. What's wild is that this was all based on a hunch, no concrete proof, just vibes and paranoia. And somehow that led to 300,000 names on a watch list. That's not surveillance, that's overachieving. But the deeper issue is this. Once a tool designed to track foreign threats starts looking inward, what's stopping it from turning on everyone else? It's not just about the mission, it's about where that mission ends. How the CIA collected domestic intel, legally or not. Once Operation Chaos was underway, the big question was, how do you spy on your own citizens without technically breaking the law? The answer, apparently, was to redefine the rules, or, in some cases, ignore them. The CIA leaned on tactics that had been tested abroad. They recruited informants, created fake organizations, and even posed as journalists to gain access to protest groups. Wiretaps were installed, surveillance teams monitored activists. And while the CIA wasn't supposed to collect domestic intel, they found a loophole. If the intel was part of a broader look at foreign influence, well, that was fair game. This legal grey area let the operation expand fast. Internal memos from the time reflect a growing unease, even among CIA officers. Some questioned the ethics, others worried about exposure, but the program continued. The CIA also worked with local police departments and other federal agencies, blurring jurisdictional lines even further. According to Declassified Church Committee memos reviewed later, Chaos also availed itself of the information gained through the CIA's New York mail intercept, and watch list built from the combined FBI-CIA data. In some cities, protest organizers were being tracked by both the FBI and the CIA at the same time. It wasn't until the mid-1970s, during the Church Committee hearings, that the full scale of these activities came to light. Testimony revealed the extent to which the CIA had operated outside its legal boundaries, sometimes in coordination with other agencies, sometimes completely off the radar. The result? A tangled web of surveillance where the line between legal and illegal, justified and paranoid, got harder and harder to see. Imagine being so paranoid that you start recruiting people to pretend they're activists, just so that they can eavesdrop on real activists. It's like a high-stakes game of political cosplay. Also, let's talk about that legal grey area. That is code for, we knew it was sketchy, but we did it anyway. And if the FBI and CIA were both watching the same people, I'd love to see that email thread. Hey, are you surveilling Steve today, or am I? Still, this wasn't just about collecting files, it was about testing the limits of power. And that's what makes this story so important, because once you redraw the lines of what's legal, they rarely snap back to where they were. Who was targeted? When you think Operation Chaos, an image springs to mind, shadowy agents and secret dossiers. But who actually ended up on those lists? The program targeted anyone the CIA believed had foreign links, starting with anti-Vietnam War organizations. Major student groups like SDS were flagged for being potentially infiltrated. Civil rights leaders, including Black Power activists, also drew attention, especially in cities where protests were intense. Data suggests a heavy emphasis on gatherings and speeches by those calling for fundamental change. It didn't stop there. College campuses became hotbeds of intel collection. Undercover agents showed up at rallies, campus events, and even dorm meetings. They planted informants, sometimes students themselves, who reported back on what was being said. who was organizing, and whether foreign influences were involved. The CIA even overlapped with domestic programs like FBI's COINTELPRO, meaning a single individual could be watched by multiple agencies simultaneously. Some high-profile cases emerged. Prominent anti-war leaders and community organizers found their names and backgrounds recorded in CIA files, as reported in declassified CIA files and confirmed by media outlets later. Prominent civil rights figures, including Martin Luther King Jr., were named in surveillance files. These were declassified in the 1970s, revealing chilling details, like dossiers on individuals simply for expressing dissent. But remember, this is all based on historical records, files released through the Church Committee, Freedom of Information, and archival journalism. No myths, no exaggeration, just raw bureaucratic surveillance. So yes, Operation Chaos wasn't just targeting a few radicals, it was quietly building a catalogue of citizen dissidents across the nation. And while many were never charged with wrongdoing, their personal lives, associations, and beliefs were logged. It raises a question: who decides what counts as foreign influence? Because if your cause questions the government, better believe someone took note. Wow. So basically, being passionate about peace or equal rights in the 60s could land you in a CIA dossier. Imagine being a college student, scribbling protest slogans, and then learning some government agent's notes said, "potential communist sympathizer." Yikes. And what's really wild is how tangled it got. CIA guy, FBI guy, all watching the same event but different angles. Like overlapping Wi-Fi networks, except one of them is tapping your mic. Now this section shakes the tree. Not just ideology, but everyday people, teachers, activists, students were watched. And for what? Speaking up. Now I'm left thinking, I'll be totally free if dissent needs a permission slip. Cultural impact. Did Operation Chaos work? It's easy to think surveillance only scares those under watch, but Operation Chaos was different. It sent ripples through culture, activism, and trust. So, did it actually work? From a CIA metric standpoint, they didn't stop a foreign puppet master. No Soviet-backed MRS, Make Revolution Succeed, organizations were found. But in terms of influence, the program had more subtle, surprising impact. Activist groups started to fracture. Not necessarily because of agents in their midst, but because the suspicion bred insecurity. Leaders became wary. Was my inner circle genuine? Could someone be wearing a wire? Organizers cancelled meetings, leaked plans, or shifted to smaller cells. The fear element worked. It didn't need a grand conspiracy to do the damage. The vibe shifted from hopeful collaboration to careful self-censorship. Operations went quiet. Protests splintered into scattered efforts, and energy drained. Public trust also took a blow. The 1970s exposés created headlines. CIA spied on its own people, revealed by declassified cables. For many Americans, the idea that a federal agency monitored peaceful protesters was a shocking breach of trust and a catalyst for re-evaluating civil liberties. Seymour Hersh wrote in the New York Times in December 1974, the CIA, directly violating its charter, conducted a massive illegal domestic intelligence operation. And that led to a broader awakening. Citizens demanded oversight, transparency, and accountability. Robert Pear of the Washington Star wrote in September of 1979, Operation Chaos involved surveillance of American citizens on a scale much larger than previously realized. The Rockefeller Commission, 1975 to 1976, noted that Operation Chaos had exceeded the CIA's statutory authority. Yes, Operation Chaos was based on flimsy foreign influence logic, but its cultural aftershocks were real and lingering. The legacy? Not a triumphant foil to foreign meddling, but a lesson in how fear breaking into the system can change the way a generation thinks, speaks, and organizes. Alright, so Operation Chaos didn't exactly derail communists, but it hit activism right where it hurts, the heart. It's crazy to think surveillance didn't just watch, it squeezed the air out of the movement. Groups fractured, trust evaporated, and everything got quiet enough that even protests lost their rhythm. At that point, mission accomplished, right? What stands out is the fact that this wasn't just about intel, it was about emotional sabotage. Fear of being watched made people self-censor. And let's be real, that's way more powerful than any spy tech. If you believe activism is about unity and noise, Operation Chaos whispered us silent, and the echoes are still there today. Legal and ethical aftermath. By the time the mid-1970s rolled around, Operation Chaos had stopped being a blurry secret. It became a national scandal. The Church Committee, a congressional investigation led by Senator Frank Church, peeled back the layers, framing the program as a glaring overstep. The CIA, stung by criticism, admitted it had crossed the legal lines, but the damage was done. Key findings from the Church Committee revealed that the CIA, working alongside the FBI, had spied on American citizens without proper oversight. The Church Committee's 1976 final report concluded, "The government has often undertaken the secret surveillance of citizens on the basis of their political beliefs, even when those beliefs posed no threat of violence or illegal acts. They had collected personal details like phone logs and travel information on people who never faced charges." The report didn't just criticize, it led to change. It recommended strict supervision of intelligence work at home. That led directly to landmark reforms. In 1978, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, became law, setting clear legal procedures. From then on, agencies needed court orders for surveillance inside the US, a major shift from chaos's era of informal watch lists and unchecked mandates. The Church Committee didn't just change the laws, it reshaped public trust. Americans woke up to the realization domestic spying wasn't just science fiction, it had happened. Senator Frank Church himself warned in a Senate hearing in 1975 that capability could be turned around on the American people, and no American would have any privacy left. And it showed how fear and secrecy can erode democratic checks and balances. Still, debates persisted. Critics argued that these reforms went too far, hampering legitimate intelligence work. Others fretted about what could happen if fear crept back. The ethical tension remains: how do you shield national security without sacrificing individual rights? Operation Chaos forced the nation to finally draw that line, and reminded us just how fragile that line can be. Alright, so here's the aftermath. Congress comes in, shakes the CIA like a soda can, and out pours FISA, with court orders and due process. Sounds neat, but spoiler, they didn't fix trust overnight. The Church Committee's findings hit the headlines. The CIA spied on you. That's the kind of bombshell that makes people spit out their coffee. Sure, reforms nailed some oversights, but the bigger story is about accountability. What I love here is the tug-of-war, security versus liberty. Chaos wasn't stopped by tech, it was stopped by good old-fashioned oversight. And that's the twist. The real power move is not spying, it's deciding who watches the watchers. What it means today: surveillance and civil liberties. Decades later, the ghost of Operation Chaos still lingers, especially when we consider how data is gathered today. Sure, the tools have changed, but the tension between security and privacy is as relevant now as it was then. Modern surveillance, tracking metadata, social media patterns, and travel footprints mirrors Chaos's core dilemma: how far can you push before you cross the line? Back then, it was dossiers and wiretaps. Today, it's algorithms and data brokers. And while FISA sets safeguards, every new technology tests them. The lesson of Chaos isn't just historical, it's personal. It reminds us to ask questions. Who gets to gather information about us, and under what authority? Are we comfortable with nested layers of oversight, or is good enough tolerance for creeping surveillance? Yet there's balance. Intelligence work remains vital for national security. The key isn't about abolishing it, it's about structuring it carefully. Operation Chaos taught us that unchecked programs crumble trust, and democracy along with them. So yes, learn the lessons, but don't turn your phones off and move into a bunker. Use this as momentum for vigilance. Ask questions, read laws, engage with oversight processes. A healthy democracy thrives on informed citizens, curious, skeptical, and proactive. Ultimately, Chaos's legacy isn't just about covert missions, it's about the conversation it sparked. It asks each of us to weigh the cost. What freedoms are we willing to sacrifice in the name of safety? And can we hold those in power accountable before we give away too much? Operation Chaos is more than just a spy story. It's a case study in how fear can wrap the mission of even the most powerful institutions. When an intelligence agency looks inward, it reveals how fragile our rights can be. So, here's the takeaway. It's not just about secret programs or shadow files. It's about who gets to decide what's acceptable. We need transparency, oversight, and a public unafraid to question authority. As we build tools to defend democracy, whether it's data encryption, civic tech, or courtroom checkups, history reminds us why accountability matters, especially when the watchers turn their eyes inward. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Now let me know in the comments below of videos you'd like to see next. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It's free and really helps out our small little channel. Okay friends, until next time, stay curious.